Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out getitInwriting.net/shows for a full list of our podcast YouTube series.
My guest is Ned Augustenborg. He is the director and creator of the documentary, it's not called The Ballad of Don Lewis.
No, it is.
Anymore.
It's hard to get rid of. It's the new film.
Don Lewis and the
Live Electronic Orchestra.
Don Lewis and the Live Electronic Orchestra. So we're going to, in a moment, get into why the name change and what it's all about. But let's start at the very beginning. I want to get a little bit of background on you, because I know that prior to making this documentary, you have made a whole lot of other films, mostly of a documentary nature, but completely in another world, mainly in the sports realm. And I know you've done some stuff for CNN. You've won awards. However, you've never ventured into this before. So let's start with where you came from, and then you can explain how the hell you got to where you are.
Okay, well, I don't know how far back you want to go.
I was born. No, just in terms of your work and career.
Okay, well, the first really exposure was at a very young age. I was probably about 8 years old. Unfortunately, my father was killed in a mid-air collision when I was 13 months old. And his legacy in a lot of ways was, not only the great stories I heard from, my aunts and uncles and my older brothers that they could remember, but he loved shooting film. So we had tons and tons of 8mm film because he documented birthdays and holidays very, very well. And he was really good at it. I didn't really appreciate how good he was until I actually pulled that little camera out myself and tried to shoot with it.
And that's very unusual for that era, too. It's not like now where everybody has a phone in their
pocket.
pocket.
No, this is, post World War II, and he was into it. And then, eventually as time went on, went on to college. Of course, back then, not many schools had anything related to film or TV when it comes to middle school and high school. And so you're left to your own devices, and living in LA, I think there were 18 broadcast channels when you include UHF. So there was a lot of television in LA when I was growing up.
Sure. And a lot of, it was still, even back then, a media city.
Oh, absolutely.
A hell of a lot different than growing up in the Midwest or something like that.
Yeah. And even though
Surrounded
I grew up in the city of Southgate, which is southeast LA, bordering Watts, and on the other side, Compton and Downey, it was kind of an eclectic sort of an area. Mm-hmm. Hollywood seemed like it might as well be 5,000 miles away because we had no relatives in it. Back then, there was two ways to get in. You get around the equipment, which was hard to do because it was cost prohibitive.
Sure.
Not like today.
Right.
So, or you get a contact of somebody who's already in the industry, and you're kind of, whatever they have to offer or suggest, or people that you can contact.
Anything for a foot in the door, basically.
Yeah. So I went the equipment route, and then got going with, I moved to Long Beach, and fortunately, the Long Beach Museum of Art was one of 3 video art complexes in the world that were just starting to embrace video as an art medium. And one was in Paris, one was in New York, one was in Long Beach. So I just went in there and said, hey, I got a degree and I don't have a job and I got tons of time and I'll love to hang out here. And eventually, so I would literally mop floors and stuff like that. But eventually they gave me the key to the studio and it was mine. So I got the equipment.
It's just, there's a parallel with people working in recording studios, the same thing.
I bet.
You go in and you're willing to clean toilets and go for sandwiches and whatever you can in order to get around the equipment and learn. Mm-hmm. And the thing that to me was always practical about that is the idea that you're not just learning the equipment, you're learning the world. You're learning the environment, and I think being surrounded by it and being in the quote-unquote belly of the beast, there's a knowledge there that you gain that is not the same as taking it in school.
Oh, no, without question. And then even beyond that, which correlates with any industry, is how you're perceived by your potential or future contemporaries. Yep. Because let's face it, just as well as I do, if not better, how much time this business takes. And so no one wants to hang around like an ass for, 14 hours a day. They want to hang around someone that's fun to be with.
That is the number one thing, when we talk about auditioning for a gig, I care, and everybody will tell you the same thing. I care a little bit about your qualifications. I care a lot more about whether or not you're a good hang.
Yeah,
You know?
it's just, it's
Yeah.
really everything. And I remember when I was going to SC, you know, I fell in love with this directing it, you know, this project, and there were some others too that I was referring to. And I was talking to my professor, and I said, well, I want to direct. I like this. And I said, but God, it just seems so daunting. You got to know technical. You got to be a storyteller. You got to know actors. I mean, he said, wait, before you go any further, you need to know those things, but that's 5%. The other 95% are strictly people skills.
Yes.
And he was right.
Yes.
He's right.
It's so true. And that, I think, is, I mean, it's true in any industry, but especially in any creative field.
Yeah.
Understanding understanding the way people relate to each other, and also understanding a little bit about the process itself of how the creative process works, knowing when to direct it, in a literal sense, right?
Yeah.
Versus letting it unfold on its own. You know,
When
and-
to sometimes impede it because it's going in the wrong direction. You know,
exactly.
Unfortunately.
Well, we don't call it impede. We call it redirect.
Okay, I like it. You've got a softer touch than I have, Daniel. So I
You know, I'm
appreciate
politically
that.
correct whenever I can be. Yeah. So let's move on from there. So now you are obviously at one point or another becoming a legit director, right? I mean,
Well, I wouldn't say a legit director. I would say a legit button pusher. So I
Awesome.
could go in and I could cut something with the, you know, analog tape to tape back then. You know, the true linear days of television. And then it was just a matter of, I was fortunate timing wise because right about that time we were on the cusp of the TV industry exploding. And by that I mean cable TV.
yeah.
Really some great opportunities there because we had at one point, it doesn't exist anymore, but CNN headline news used to exist, and they would provide 6-minute slugs at the top and the bottom of the hour for local affiliates to do their own local news.
When you're doing that kind of stuff, it teaches you how to be very, very concise.
Yeah.
It teaches you how to tell the story quickly, you know, which then definitely comes in handy as a documentarian.
Oh, big time. Because
bet.
that was the basis of putting the film together in Don Lewis and the Live Electronic Orchestra. Is you're compiling this footage, and you know you're doing a documentary, and you have an idea what you're doing, but you don't know. It's not like a narrative film where you got your script. And I don't want to downplay film narrative process by saying it's paint by numbers, but it literally is compared
It's
to
more
documentary.
predictable.
Yeah, you
is
got
what it is.
You're following your script.
Right.
You
If
got
you're doing a documentary, you have no idea what you're going to run into, what's going to come out of somebody's mouth.
No.
And especially when you're talking about somebody like Don Lewis.
one thing, you know, it's all going to be good. That's where I was. Lucky.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is part of the challenge too, is that, you know, you end up with too much. You know?
Right, and it gets too lopsided. Because
Yeah.
like doing a documentary sort of on Jesus. I mean, there was actually like double Jesus, I call it. Leo, the Live Electronic Orchestra, is really a biblical story.
Yeah.
Because Don created it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Don got crucified, as did his instrument. They went away.
There you go.
And they were resurrected.
Damn.
It's very much.
Now let's talk a little bit about your introduction to Don,
Okay.
because there is a person who, well, first of all, he's the oldest teenager I've ever met.
That's a good way of putting it.
You know, he is constantly animated. I've never seen one. He's at least in his 70s, right?
He's 80.
He's
Just turned
80.
80.
Okay, so he's
Yeah.
an 80-year-old gentleman who has more energy than most 4-year-olds. And
And a sense of curiosity.
exactly,
Yeah.
an excitement and a sense of curiosity with, well, pretty much everything, but in particular with music. And, you know, I've interviewed Don. His interview has not yet come up on our show, but I'm going to time the two of you very close to each
that'd be
other.
great.
And I'll be honest, my biggest challenge with interviewing Don was too much content.
Yeah, it is.
Don is a wealth of information. He is just a nonstop fond of. He's a chatterbox, you know, and not in a bad way. He's just, you know, you ask him the old saying, you know, you ask him the time, he'll tell you how to build a clock,
Yeah,
you know.
that's what it's on. Yeah.
And he's such a brilliant guy, so I can see where as soon as you meet him, the layers of the onion start peeling away, and you go, "Oh my God, this is going to be quite the project." Right?
Yeah. Well, you know, the thing was, is my first interview with Don, I ended up using a lot of footage in the documentary that I didn't think I would, because he was so he was so intuitive about where I was coming from, in the sense of, let's keep it kind of layman oriented here, and let's keep the historical perspective of your accomplishments and the accomplishments of the whole genre of electronic music, so everyone would kind of find it interesting. And
because he can get very technical.
Yeah, he can get as technical as you want.
Yeah, I mean, he's an engineer.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
and that's part of what the impetus
He was a
for this
nuclear
was.
weapons specialist for the Air Force.
Yeah, so no big whoop, yeah. But you know, and that's what's fascinating to me, is that Don's entire approach was so dual-brained. It was left brain, right brain. It was
Crazy.
the technical stuff of, you know, I'm going to tear apart this drum machine, you know, and I'm going to make these synthesizers talk to each other. This is way before MIDI existed, you know, and at the same time, it's very creative and it's very musical, and it's, you know, I'm doing this because I want this organ part to fit nicely with this drum part. You know, there's a musical creativity aspect of it as well.
Well, the thing is, the guy's so damn talented. The demands that he was placing on himself technically were completely based on the fact that he knew he could pull it off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of people, they just stop at something because, well, I'm not going to, even if I kind of did that, I wouldn't know how to do it. But Don was never a limitation there. And what really sort of exemplifies Don's left-right brain talents is just playing his instrument, the live electronic orchestra. And that's nuts. He's singing, his one foot's doing the rhythm and the other foot's doing a counter rhythm, and then he's got, you know, 5 manuals, and then he's got, you know, and he's mixing. And singing all at the same time. You know? It's crazy.
Well, and that is fascinating to me because, you know, as a musician myself, I mean, I struggle with playing drums because all 4 limbs are doing something different, you know? I have a friend who's not only a great drummer, but he took up pedal steel guitar, which is even more complex. It's got the levers for the knees and all this other stuff, you know, and 2 necks. And so, you know, the idea of being able to make the brain divide the tasks, that's, you know, that's pretty left brain.
That is,
And then again, you know, to move that into the intuitive aspect of making music, that's a challenge.
And he met the challenge. You know? He did it in a very, very big way. So this first interview I had with Don, we were done with the interview, and we were both having a good time. He says, "Where are you going now?" After I said, "Well, there was a volunteer that was interviewing his wife Julie at the same time in another room." He goes, "I'm going to check on that and go back to the studio." He goes, No, I need to talk to you. So we went into the conference room at the NAMM, and I don't know how long we were in there. I don't know, an hour and a half, you know, getting to know each other. And we just hit it off. But, you know, Don hits it off with everybody.
Sure.
But you could sense there was a strong level of excitement, you know, on his part, that I was showing an interest in this instrument and him, you know. So then we just built from that. And, of course, there were situations that weren't completely clear to me that I needed to get my arms around in order to be able to tell the proper story. And Don and Julie were very slow in giving me the full picture. One of the reasons why is, I don't care what your journey is and how successful it's been, there's going to be some pitfalls and there's going to be some barriers. And Don had his share, and so did Julie. And it wasn't until I started finding out about that, and it was really through Dan Del Fiorentino, you know, historian at the Museum of Making Music, had seen Don when he was a teenager. And he was the one that facilitated, it was his idea to get the Leo back and resurrected. That was all his baby. So he knew more about Don than I certainly did at that point. And he just kind of nudged me one day out of nowhere and said, "You know about the Union?" I said, "No, what are you talking about? What Union?" You know, I didn't think he was talking about the Union versus the Confederacy. I don't, you know. And I go, "What?" He goes, "Oh, Don had an issue with the Union. You have to put that in your film, or it's not going to be a complete story." So I eventually brought it up to them, and both Julie and Don said, "Nope, won't talk about it." Oh, well, can we talk about not talking about it? You know, and their opinion and their attitude, and it's so consistent with their loveliness, is keep it positive, water under the bridge. We're on to other stuff now. It's not something we want to go back to. So I had to sort of ponder that for a while, for a few weeks, and say, well, how do I change him on that?
Right. How do I tell this part of the story without going negative, basically?
Well, it's going to be negative, but that's conflict. And see, you got to have conflict in a story
It's
to make
true.
it right. So
It's
that's
true.
It. And
Yeah.
besides, you know how positive Don is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
everyone likes positivity, but you need a little negativity to, you know, shed some light on it.
Yes.
right?
Well, and also I think, you know, without that particular adversity, Don would not have ended up where he ended up, because that, you know, the so just for people who don't know, basically the union came up to Don and more or less tried to force him from using Leo and from playing at all live because they felt he was taking away jobs from other people, right? That's,
Yeah, they deemed him an enemy of the musicians
yes.
union
And he was not alone.
on a national basis. No, he was not
He
alone.
was not alone.
They
There were
doing this to
many
other
musicians
people,
who faced this, especially at the beginning of Synthesis.
and
But
especially in the local six. here in San
exactly,
Francisco, yeah.
exactly. But what happened there as a result of that was that Don then started working with music companies, musical instrument companies, and he was, no pun intended here, instrumental in the development of a number of great instruments for Roland and Yamaha in particular.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't get any bigger than the DX7. That was the number one selling synthesizer by far when
Yeah.
it came out.
Yeah, I was just working with the Audio Engineering Society for their convention, which just happened. One of the presentations was by John Chowning. And he was talking about the development of FM synthesis. And I kept thinking, I was editing this presentation. I kept thinking back to Don and his role in all of this. There's a club of people who were very, very involved in the early days of synthesis, pushing boundaries in different directions with different types of synthesis, different types of instruments. And I think this was such a ripe playground for someone like Don.
Yes, it was. He would, and he'd get these Christmas gifts, you know, off the shelf and rewiring them to suit his needs, you know, because he was.
You have voided
intimidated
your
by the
warranty.
well, yeah. I want to see how they did here, you know. See if they did. Yeah, and what's great about Don, when you mentioned John Chowning, Don's just an absolute childlike enthusiasm and curiosity for the world in general came to fore in the 70s. He was taking classes on FM synthesis with John Chowning teaching in the 70s at Stanford. So this was well before 83 when the DX7 came out.
Sure.
So the reason I bring that up is that was still part of Don's existence even before the union ruined his performance career, you know.
With Don being the challenging individual that he is in terms of his brain just going, you know, 100 miles an hour all the time. And then Julie, who is both his wife and to a certain extent his manager.
Yeah.
What kind of challenges were there for you in terms of, you know, you just mentioned, for example, not wanting to talk about the union. Obviously, your relationship with them developed over time too. Did that change the way the direction of the movie?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a very personal movie for me. For a number of reasons. There's correlations in his life that I can relate to. Of course, not on such a grand scale as Don's, but when it came down to really the bottom line, even though I was continuing to shoot footage, there was still the trust level had to keep built up and up. And as my credibility rose with them and they realized they could trust me, then we all started to understand that this film is probably going to be the legacy. I mean, after we're gone, my goal is 1,000 years from now, someone's looking at this movie going, well, that's what they did back then, you know, and they'll find it entertaining.
Sure.
Maybe I'm hoping for too much there, but that's what I want. And so you start realizing, well, this is how people are going to perceive me, you know, in the future. And that was a big responsibility on my part. But what I did with Don and Julie, which I think a lot of producers wouldn't have done, is I wanted two things to happen. I wanted them to know that I hadn't given up on the project, and two, that they realized I knew how to cut a story.
I think it's important to talk about getting to know Don on the basis that you did, because that made this more than just a documentary.
Yeah,
That
and
made you family.
eventually they adopted me. I mean, he calls me little bro, I call him big bro, and you know.
Which is kind of strange since you're taller than
Yeah,
him.
I know.
But, you know.
But he's older. That's what makes it funny, though. And it's really funny when people see us walking down the street together, because it's like we don't look the same at all, but we're bros, And of course, Julie's the matriarch,
Of course.
And so anyway, though that process of showing them rough cuts it was invaluable, not only in them gaining my, my trust, their trust, or them trusting me, but Julie, as well as Don, were very, very integral in saying, oh no, historically that doesn't make sense. I'd be off on a date, or I'd be off on when it happens in terms of the sequence of the scenes, and they'd get me right back online. That's priceless.
Well, and history tends to blur anyway, as we know.
Yeah.
So, it's important to have more than one source to authenticate, as it were.
No, because they were there. They
Yeah.
lived it. And that's the nice thing about a dialectic film, where you don't have like a Ken Burns or all narration, obviously, because you just can't get someone to talk to about the Civil War, but having it from the people adds a sort of level of truth to it. So
Yes.
so anyway, that was kind of my scheme on how to keep the ball rolling, and then eventually I get my way on things that were necessary for the film.
Now, for you, as I know you had mentioned, you have a cursory musical background, but not really
Not
in that
really,
sense. How was this for you, relating to somebody who has pretty much spent his entire life eating, breathing, sleeping music and technology? Obviously, a big learning curve, but beyond that, there's a language spoken among musicians, among
Absolutely.
technology people, audio people, and you must have had to kind of adjust to that whole lingua franca.
Yeah, well, it was fun because I was teaching Don about TV because of his curiosity, and he was teaching me more about music and sound creation, and like a lot of people, well, it's just a music documentary. Well, I don't like to call it a music documentary. It's kind of a sonic documentary when you really, what I mean? Because it goes deeper than that, at the real gut level. And so that was fun, sharing notes back and forth on that. And then I really loved music. I was growing up, and I was fortunate to grow up in the '70s, where there was just such an eclectic variety of great talent.
Very experimental time, musically,
And so thus the electronic music and the synthesizer fascination. So I felt like I had a strong knowledge of who was good and who wasn't, more than most. But really the key was the last documentary I did, which was one of the 3 shorts I did early in my career, was on a rock band in LA, a struggling teenage rock band that's trying to make it in Hollywood. And that in a lot of ways gave me the confidence, even though that was a couple really 15 years prior. That was a lot of work.
You understood the world, though.
Yes, and I wasn't intimidated by it. In fact, I found it fascinating. And in fact, I'll get to the point where I don't know if I ever did a documentary again. I don't know if I could do one that isn't music related, because that's just become part of my language in telling the story that I've relied on.
Sure.
So but and Don, of course, is so kind. If I said something stupid and ignorant, he'd call me on it in a very kind way, and get me right in there. So
let's talk a little bit about the music.
Okay.
Because there too, Don's music it definitely fit with the times. I mean, he was right in there with Sly Stone and all of these people who were really forging new territories in terms of mixing R&B and synthesis, and his background is in gospel, which so was Sly Stone's, for example.
Right, okay.
So watching all of that and seeing all of this from your perspective, what shined through for you more, his musical aspect or the creative technology aspect?
I'd have to say the musical more than anything else, because it just all the hours I saw him play, and she always nailed it. And then this ability to just play spontaneously, just come up with these chord transitions that are just nuts. And I've asked him about it. He goes, I don't know where they come from. They just kind of show up, It's kind of like he dreams them and they're there. And it's just, that's just fascinating to me. So, and it didn't matter. He could be on a Steinway. He could be on a little kind of dorky, cheap synthesizer you get at Kmart, or he could be on Live Electronic Orchestra, and he's going to make something sound good. It's going to be cool. I think when it comes to the technical, what impressed me the most is how I could relate to it is, if you're going to do a project of any sort and be successful, it takes a lot of work, and all that stuff that Don had to consider and do and make happen was
Yeah.
so much work in creating the Leo. Certainly would be a deterrent for most people. It's like, I'm just gonna spend $20,000 on this bow, guy. It's much
Right.
easier to do that, you know.
Right. And then all I really want to do is I want to spend 3 or 4 days figuring out this one problem so that I can play 3 notes over here.
Right.
That's what it is.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. And that's brought up in the film, that type of a perspective, which was definitely relevant at the time. So yeah, and you know, when you think about the music in the film, there's like 3 or 4 different categories. There's Don performing live, you know, which is one category, and then there's Don performing live back in his heyday, back at Fisherman's Wharf in the Bay Area, with Leo in the 70s and 80s. And then there's this other category, which was so much fun. It was eventually, I didn't bring it up right away because no one was ready for it. It's like, Don, okay, we've got all this music and this is working out well, but we need to score the film. I need it scored.
Ah.
And
It's not just like, oh, I have a track laying around here.
No, it's not like he had tons of music, but you need mood music, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So it was funny. It's like it dawned on me one day. I don't know what I was doing. I was golfing or had my 5th scotch. I don't know what I was doing. But it's like, I was thinking about, the challenges of scoring. I go, wait, I got Don. That's, like, what am I thinking, So, and of course, Don was overjoyed, and I think he just was waiting for my, offer to do it. And so it was incredible because we did it here. John and Julie came for 6 days at my place, and the goal was to score everything. I had my notes. I know what sections, how long everything needed to be, and what the mood was. And all I really had to do with Don is tell him what I wanted, and then sometimes, oh wait, let's go on TV here, and okay, this movie from this era, I want it to sound like this. Oh, okay, all right, okay, I got it.
Wind him up and let him go.
And he's boom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Boom, 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 boom. And then it was just way beyond, what I expected. I mean, I shouldn't have been surprised because of Don's talent, but, how do you direct a guy that is so good and not, it was kind of like mine to screw up. Like if it didn't work, it was not going to be Don's fault. It was going to be my fault, So we made it work and we got what we wanted, And what really impressed me was the timing factor. It's like, well, I'll do that again. And I'll get it down to 32 seconds instead of 37. Like, great. Okay, go ahead.
So let me back up a little bit and sort of merge your world and his a little bit. In one sense, you started out in an era where, first of all, you were using film. Second of all, everything was very linear.
Yep.
Don started out in an era where music was much more linear than it is now.
Sure.
We recorded to 2-inch tape. Actually, I think he even preceded that.
Sure.
But point being, it's no secret how music technology evolution has changed music. The idea that you can overdub, the idea that you can now edit things in a digital audio workstation, and I can fly in this chorus, I can autocorrect this, I can undo that, all of these things that didn't exist
on a laptop.
Even in the 70s. Yeah, true, exactly. Laptops didn't even. But for you, a similar process occurred, and there you were essentially starting this movie in one technological era, and then 10 years later finishing it in a different technological era.
That's very insightful.
How did that whole thing evolve?
Well, it was just kind of forced. So,
Sure.
it was coming. High HD was going to be here to stay, but bulk of my footage was shot on standard def, So the thing that was great is back in the old days, in the standard def days, and I'm sort of dating myself, is you had to get the lighting perfect.
Sure.
Everything had to be perfect when you shot. And you could get a time-based corrector, and you had a time-based corrector, and that was like tint and setup, and luminance, and that was it. And those cost like $14,000 for a good time-based corrector.
Right.
But that was about it, So it had to be good to begin with. So the good news was by the time I was doing the documentary, all this footage looked good. So Beta SP was the best analog format I shot in. And God, it looks good. And it's almost got this, I don't know if surreal is the right word, but it's got this special warmth to it that seems to be more prominent now as we go from high def to 4K to 8K. You know,
Sure,
there's
yeah.
almost a sterility involved with these increased resolution
Yes.
formats. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And there's just something comfortable about it. And maybe it's just the eyes of an old man talking, but
No, it's a
I
certain
like it.
look.
Yeah,
It's a
it's
certain
a
look, and there really is. To my mind, for example, a lot of times I won't shoot in 4K, or if I do shoot in 4K, it will only be to crop it later,
Right.
because I want that softness.
Mhm.
You know, and I
Yeah.
think that is, I mean, most of our audience are audio people, musicians, and I think you can relate to that on an audio level as well by saying, analog tape. Everybody loves analog tape, the saturation of it, because again, it smooths things a little bit. It gives you a different type of perspective.
It does, yeah.
And I think that is, now for me, for example, working in music,
Right.
the idea of being able to multi-track, okay, I grew up with that, I'm not old enough to remember 3-track machines and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I know that when I was able to do things like lock machines together, when I was able to do things like non-linear editing,
Right.
non-linear editing just changes the game completely.
Completely.
And that carries through to video as well.
Well,
does
see,
it
that was the
not?
most intimidating part of this whole process that you brought up, was going from not a great linear editor, that has like 7 pre-roll machines and all that stuff. I mean, it's not what I did for a living, but I knew how to cut, and it was just learning the software. And I just, I really didn't want to learn the software. So I said, God, if I could raise the money and find an editor I got along with, I could just direct them. And then I said, but then, as the time went by, I just said, well, I'm going to learn it. I'll figure it out. And I did. Premiere Pro was my choice, and I'm glad I made it.
And you know what? The thing is, even if you hire someone else, you need to know enough to tell them how to do what
You
you
got to have a language.
envision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it was a totally different language directing a non-linear editor as opposed to a linear editor,
Sure.
because there's more you can do. You know?
Sure.
And then I had a couple of instances where I was new to non-linear editing, and I was directing an editor, and I didn't know what. Can you do this? I mean, he was like, and he finally, one guy said, just tell me to do. Don't ask me if I can. He goes, because I kept saying, can you? Can? Because I didn't want to make demands that couldn't be met. So.
But for you, coming into this was also probably an exercise in not only learning the new technology itself, but learning what's possible. Because really,
I'm still learning that.
oh, of course. But and that's the whole world we live in. When people first were able to overdub, learning what's possible. Oh, you mean I can do 3-part vocal harmonies with myself?
Yeah.
And the same thing is true now with. Oh, you mean I could completely change the coloration of this video. I can change the angle. I can do all of these different things that I could never have done before.
Yeah. And they're all time-consuming things, because really what you're doing is now you're sort of presented with this sort of digital palette of colors, and you're painting new pictures. And I just got done with that. I just repainted everything in the film, literally.
And part of the problem there is you're almost overwhelmed by options. I call it the paralysis of analysis. It's you really do just, you feel like, well, should we do this? I mean, I've spent so much time in the studio with musicians. Well, can we try another? You know what? That was good. No, but I could do. And these are the kind of things that the technology has enabled us to do, but it makes us almost overthink the art form.
It does. And then you got to get to the point, I have to say to myself, is the viewer really going to notice the difference? It's sort of like there's a hit song, right? And it's about the song, it's about the emotion,
Exactly.
It's about the performance. And no one's ever going to say, well, if that bridge was a little bit longer, I think I'd like that song more. That's never going to happen.
Warts and all,
Yeah,
put
right.
it out there.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, it's all about the content. And that's what I think is so important. And that's what I think you've achieved with this movie, to bring it around to that.
Right, yeah.
Like the way I did that?
Yeah, I did. I'm impressed. You'll be a good talk show host someday.
Thank you. So I've heard, yeah. But I think you validate Dawn. Let me rephrase that. I think you validate Dawn's accomplishments by, in part, helping us to get to know Dawn.
Well, thanks.
And Dawn is such a unique personality that you just, he's the likely hero. He's the guy who you go, you're just rooting for him the whole time,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. But the challenge as a storyteller was, how do I efficiently get people to fall in love with Don in the first 3 or 4 minutes?
Yeah,
You know, because
yeah.
you want to lock them in and go, this
Yep,
is good. And so then you have to put historical context to validate his accomplishments that I will share with you later on, right? So sort of like a contract you're making with the
teaser.
viewer.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you do a documentary on Jimi Hendrix, there's going to be so many millions of people that are going to want to see it. They know who he is. No-name documentaries have their own special challenges, you know.
It's true. As an individual, he is a unique person. As a musician, he's also unique in that he's got his music itself is all over the map.
It is.
In terms of genre, in terms of creativity. I don't know what I can say about the guy that hasn't been said, you know?
Yeah, there's more to be said. He's not done yet, you know?
Yeah,
It's almost like he's just warming up. But, you know, getting back to the whole music, you know, documentary concept, you know, I've had people say, what is the most important thing? You know, as you kind of get older, people give you more respect than you probably deserve in terms of putting together videos and television and films. And, you know, what's the most important aspect? And my answer is always the same: audio. You know, audio is the most important thing, and of course music falls in that category.
Sure.
And because I had enough experiences with people that didn't know what they're doing, where audio hits your heart, hits your gut, it physically impacts you, and if it's bad, it actually hurts, and people will leave the theater even though they may not know why they're leaving the theater.
Sure.
Visually, you can get away with a lot more. So you know, the music aspect of it is very important, and then especially, you know, like I said, that it's music was a character in this film.
Yeah.
And I think by its absence in a few segments, it even complemented music more, because it was like, wait, there's no music. This is getting serious. Something's changing.
Sure.
Here. So
it's almost ominous.
Yes. So, because I had one friend said, now, wall music. I'm telling you, you should never not have music. And I didn't agree with that. I didn't go with that advice. So I went my own way on that.
Well then, you know.
But yeah. So anyway, that's my.
That's interesting
opinion
though,
of audio.
because you know, a lot of film scoring type composers would say to you, no, you can't have silence. You have to have maybe just a building little, you know, string figure or something like that, you know, like Jaws, that kind of thing, you know. But it's true. The soundtrack itself and audio in general, you know, I mean, I would rather have crummy video than crummy audio.
Yeah, absolutely. It's easier to handle.
Sure.
It's easier to handle.
Sure.
So yeah, and it just like I said, one of the things I've done, I think, right with this film, I've done some things wrong, is I made sure there were probably more test screenings than most people ever have.
Well, and that was something I wanted to mention to you, because in the time that I've known you, which is only a couple of years now, the movie's been finished at least twice.
Yeah, at least I think it's been finished 4 times. Yeah, yeah. We'll get different potential deadlines and different real deadlines, and you know, I'm glad I had those deadlines, because it forced the film into another level. But I did take a wrong direction with one, you know, and here and there. And you know, one of the things that was really hurried a lot was the fact that the color grading, color correction, and some technical aspects that I knew needed to get handled, but I didn't think they'd be recognized, so I kind of washed over them in kind of quick ways. So the beauty now is I, you know, recut the film for PBS. And the 94-minute version, which everyone loved, is now bye-bye, but will get resurrected as a director's cut under the new title, Don Lewis and the Live Electronic Orchestra. So it will be back, but digitally enhanced for your viewing pleasures.
I love it. But so the finished film, the official release now, is going to be on PBS?
Yeah, national PBS in June.
That's fantastic.
It worked out really well. We were looking at February potentially for Black History Month, but I need to get sponsorship for it. That's going to take me some time because I'd like to recoup some money. funny concept, that money thing.
Wait, you get paid for this stuff?
Yeah, in theory, you're supposed to put food on the table while you're doing it, right? So this is a great opportunity for that to happen. So anyway, as I didn't even realize it, but June is African American Music History Month.
That's true.
And Carter, I think, came up with that quite a few years ago.
And coincidentally, this June, the annual NAMM show will be happening.
That's true. That's very true. That's an interesting coincidence how that coincides there. So that could be very timely.
Yeah.
So yeah, looking at June, and then I think it seems very likely that we could have revisit the film again the following February for Black History Month in PBS. So things are looking really, really good. Now it's the kind of foreign distribution concept I got to start getting my arms around, because we discussed this before. There is going to be a market for people that are going to absolutely enjoy discovering Don Lewis.
Europeans love American music more than we do,
Yeah.
as we know. It's sad but true,
Yeah. So,
Cool.
so things are looking good. It's been a long journey, but the light at the end of the tunnel continues to get brighter, as they say.
I love it.
Yeah.
Nice. Ned Augustenborg, thank you for being my guest.
Daniel, my pleasure. Thank you for the invite, and maybe we can do it again sometime.
Maybe we can.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.